Hello and welcome. One of the common questions that I get about my solar system and when I'm helping others to try to determine if they can install rooftop solar on their roofs is the direction of the panels and whether or not they have to be east-west facing or south facing or whatever that might be. And so to answer that question, I created a video and I will link in a card right here, and I cover the differences between that based on my system, which is south facing, and some of my neighbors, which are east-west facing. Well, another common question that I get is how much does the power production vary between the winter and the summer? And so let's get into that. If we begin our question with Google and we type in solar production summer versus winter, you will get a basic answer here that talks about that basically the length of the day varies. So the winter is shorter, summer is longer, as we all know. And then also the sun is lower in the sky in the winter versus higher in the sky in the summer. And so all of those things affect the amount of production you're going to get out of your panels at the different times of the year. Now, if we jump over here, we can talk about the winter solstice. So the winter solstice is the shortest day of the year, and then the summer solstice is the longest day of the year. So you might think, oh, you'll get the highest production on June 20th and the lowest on December 21st. But it's not quite that simple because of the angle of the roof that comes into play as well. So it totally depends on that, as well as the climate and the weather of those particular days, of course, as well. Here on this site, Energy Sage, it just mentions that the ideal pitch angle is between 30 and 45 degrees. Well, when I measured my roof, it comes out to be an angle of 5/12 or 22.6 degrees. So not ideal, but I still get really good production. So let's jump into my Solar Edge monitoring portal for my solar array and look at the actual numbers. Now notice over here it says it's a 9.98 kilowatt system, which is what it is now, but when I first installed the system it was a 6.38 kilowatt system, so keep that in mind. So here we are looking at December 28th, 2017, and so this is the closest fully sunny day to the winter solstice that I could get that year. So just a couple of days later, shouldn't make much of a difference on the length of the day. And we'll see that it produced 28 kilowatt hours that day, and it peaked at 4.5 kilowatts during the day. Started production here at, 8 a.m. and finished off at about 4:45 p.m., about what you would expect. You'll notice the curve here, see how short that is, or how narrow rather. If we jump over to June 20th of 2018, you'll see that the curve here is much wider. Our production is really ramping up at 6:45 a.m., but it technically began at about 5:45 a.m., and then it's about done by 7:45 p.m., and it really continues until 8:45 p.m., and it peaked at 5.2 kilowatts. So remember, the winter day was peaking at 4.5 kilowatts, and so this peak here is largely affected by the angle of the sun. So the sun is higher in the summer, but it's not necessarily at the ideal angle for my roof. It just happens to be the highest it gets in the year. And so you can see the days are longer. So if you look at the bell curve here is much narrower, here it's much wider. And so the various factors come into play there. So now you might think, okay, so was this the highest producing day, June 20th? And the answer is no. So if we jump over here and look at the entire month of June, you'll see June 20th is right here. Well, yeah, 2 days later, it was a higher producing day. We had a 45.58 kilowatt day versus 44.1 kilowatt hour a day. This was a perfectly sunny day. This is a perfectly sunny day. The curves look pretty much the same, just it eked out a little bit more power that day somehow. Now, if we go backwards in time, you'll see over here, so once again, this was the high 45.58. You'll see over here there's a 45.7, 46.1. If we go back to the beginning of the month, it's 46.1 again. So these days, they were shorter technically a little bit. Why are they producing more? Let's go back another month even. If we go back here into May, we can see there's some 45-hour days. There's a 46.2. All the way over here, May 1st, 46.6. So that's 6 weeks prior to the summer solstice, and it's producing quite well. We go into April, we'll see there's some 46 kilowatt hour days in April as well. So what's going on here is another thing that affects the production, and that's the temperature of the panels. For whatever reason, I don't know the physics behind it, but the silicone in the solar panels does not produce as well when it's hot. And so in the spring, April and in May, even beginning in March, we jump over here to March, you'll see the production is ramping up quite well, and the days are cooler, and the days are getting longer, they're not as long as they'll be in June, but there's this balance, kind of balancing act that's happening as you transition from April, May, and into June, where yes, the days are getting longer, but the temperatures are getting hotter, and so you actually have the most production. Like the highest producing days always happen in May, in my experience. However, June, as you saw, has consistently sunny days across the whole month. It doesn't always, but in this particular year it did, and so the whole month produced the most. So if we jump over here to the entire year of 2018, we can see that June indeed was the highest producing month of the year, and that's largely just because there are long days and it was consistently sunny. The weather tends to get pretty dry here in Utah, and so there's not a lot of cloudy, stormy weather to limit the production. But you can see, January and February, they're fine. They produce quite well, and then it starts to ramp up here. Now, in Utah, the net metering balance that we're on with Rocky Mountain Power, they reset our balance, our net metering balance, down to 0 in our March billing cycle, which for us is around the 25th or 28th of the month of March. So this production, we're starting to ramp up, and we're able to use that power, and then if we don't use it, plus anything that's excess from the prior year, we'll lose it. So we're usually doing whatever we want to just use as much energy as we can. And then once that resets, then April, May, and June, we are really ramping up on production and putting away power for the next winter, basically. Then in June and July and August, we are starting to really use a lot more power with our air conditioning. And so we're not necessarily always banking for the future. We might be using it all up. It kind of depends on the season. And then here in September, this particular year, it still produced really high. And then in October, it started to decline. Now, some of the other years I've seen where September and October were tied. In this case, August and September tied. It varies a little bit every year. But the days are definitely getting shorter. And then by November, for sure, the production has started to drop quite a bit. And then December is winter weather again. Now let's compare my system to a neighboring system. So this system right here is a system that I've talked about in a prior video. This is the house that is just a few houses away from mine that is east and west facing panels. None of them are south facing. And you'll see here it's a 6.67 kilowatt system. So mine's 6.38, so very, very close in size. Their sides of their curve here, this is looking at December 28th, 2017 again, so this is the closest sunny day to the winter solstice. Their sides are a little bit wavy because of the way the sun travels across the sky and hits their rays on the east side and then transitions to their west side. It peaked here at 2.6 kilowatts. Mine, remember, peaked at 4.5 kilowatts that same day. So the angle of the panels is all totally different. If you think about it, if their pitch is, say, 22 like mine, but it's 22 eastward facing, and the sun is low in the sky in December, so it's at a really bad angle for the panels. So it does not peak very high at all. The production began at 8 a.m., about the same as mine, and then finished at 4:45, so about the same beginning and end, but the peak is much, much lower. Now let's jump to their summer solstice production. So this is June 20th of 2018, and you can see they start here at 6:45 a.m. and then go until about 8:15. Yeah, it's about where it finishes off. And so they also have the curvy sides here and on the other side, and then they peak at 4.5 kilowatts, or sorry, 4.8 kilowatts. So that's, mine was 4.5 in the winter, so it's kind of interesting. There's always peaks lower because, once again, east-west facing, but their curve is still plenty wide. And we can see here that they produced 43 kilowatt hours on their June 20th day, and on their December 28th day, they produced almost 15 kilowatt hours. So pretty big swing in production there for them. Looking at their entire June, it looks pretty much the same as mine, just their numbers are a little bit different, but the weather obviously was the same for all of us. And then if we look at their full year, we can see it reflects pretty much the same trend as mine. You'll notice their September is lower, though that's different. They had some technical difficulties and part of their system was offline that month. But this gives you an idea of what you can expect if your panels are east-west facing, and well, there's a lot of different parameters. It could be at a different latitude, etc. Now let's look at a third and final system. So this one is directly next door to the east-west facing system. This one is 7.41 kilowatts, so a little bit larger. This one is exclusively east facing. So that's kind of an interesting thing to note. You'll notice that the curve here is much smoother than the east-west facing. It's just as smooth as mine. So the panels are all facing the same direction, so they have very consistent output. Their production begins here at 8 a.m., about the same, but it ramps up very quickly because it's east facing, and then it drops off equally, well, maybe even a little bit slower on the back side. And then you'll see here there's this trailing tail. It kind of finishes the bulk of its production here by 3:30 p.m. So pretty early in the afternoon, and then it still continues a bit though. We're at 0.2 kilowatts, and then it's continuing down, and then it really finishes off here at 5 p.m. So definitely, obviously, you're getting more production in the morning for obvious reasons there. And their peak is at 3.4 almost kilowatts during the day. And they produced a total of 17.3 kilowatts throughout the day on that December 28th day. Now if we jump to June 20th for the east-facing roof, once again, much wider bell curve, longer day. They start here at about 6:45 and they finished off at about 5 p.m. So about what you'd expect, and they peaked at 5.8 kilowatts and they produced a total of 50 kilowatt hours. Then their June, the trend is about the same. And then over here on the year, they had some technical difficulties in September as well, which is kind of ironic, so ignore that month. But the production pretty much is the same. We all peak in June, but our highest individual producing days are in May. I hope this has been informative to see what the actual production is in a real-world setting on 3 real roofs, one south-facing, one east-west facing, and one only east-facing. If you have any other questions, feel free to post them in the comments down below. If you're interested in seeing future videos like this one related to renewable energy, solar panels, electric vehicles, technology, click subscribe to my channel, change the bell notification to all, and you will get notified every time I upload a new video. And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.